The day Queen Vaelithra of the Sovereign Keth chose me as her personal bodyguard, the entire palace laughed. I mean that literally. I was standing in the Hall of Assembled Shields, which is exactly as grandiose as it sounds, a corridor 3 stories tall lined with the ceremonial weapons of every champion who had ever guarded the Keth throne, and when the Grand Chamberlain read my name from the selection scroll, the sound that followed was not applause. It was not polite silence. It was a ripple of open, undisguised laughter that moved through the assembled court like a wave, starting at the back with the palace servants and rolling forward until it reached the high guard themselves, 3 meters tall and armored in iridescent black chitin, who did not technically laugh but whose mandibles clicked in the rhythmic pattern that, I had been told, meant you are joking. They were not wrong to doubt. My name is Sergeant First Class Davin Reyes, late of the Terran Coalition's 9th Frontier Security Battalion, currently, somehow, employed as a diplomatic security consultant on Keth Prime, the seat of the sovereign Keth matriarchy, a civilization that had been spacefaring for roughly 6,000 years before humans figured out fire. I am 5 feet 11 inches tall. I weigh 187 pounds. I do not have bioluminescent markings, armored plates, venom sacs, or a secondary set of arms. I am, by every measurable standard of the Keth court, completely, laughably ordinary. And Queen Vaelithra had just selected me as her personal shield. She hadn't done it by accident. That was the part I didn't understand at first, that she'd chosen me on purpose, with full awareness of what she was doing. I learned later that the selection ceremony had been preceded by 2 hours of court debate in which every advisor, every general, every high guard commander had presented her with a ranked list of qualified candidates. Keth warriors of proven lineage, Voron honor guards renowned across 4 systems, even a pair of Drelathi sentinels whose species communicated exclusively in a frequency that caused headaches in most humanoids. She had listened to all of it. Then she had asked her chamberlain to produce the personnel files of the Terran Coalition's security consultants assigned to the diplomatic quarter. There were 6 of us. She'd read through 5 files, set them aside, and pointed to the 6th. Mine. When the chamberlain had asked, with all appropriate diplomatic delicacy, whether the queen was certain, whether she might perhaps wish to reconsider, given that the Terran is a newer species with limited field exposure to palace protocol, and the security challenges of the current political climate were considerable, she had said, and I was told this verbatim later by a palace scribe who seemed equal parts horrified and delighted. Yes, the human, it will be amusing. So that was how I got the job. As a joke. I met her for the first time the morning after the selection ceremony, in the small private garden off the Queen's East Wing, a space that, I was told, almost no one outside her innermost circle was permitted to enter. She was standing with her back to me when I arrived, studying a cluster of phosphorescent flowers that pulsed with a slow, deep blue light. She was taller than I'd expected most Keth were, but even among her people she carried herself with an elongated stillness, a kind of vertical calm that made her seem like she'd been grown rather than born. Her skin was a deep iridescent violet, shifting to silver at the edges of her bioluminescent markings, which ran from her temples down along her jaw and continued beneath the high collar of her robe. Her hair was white, fine, and cropped close on the sides with a longer sweep at the crown, threaded with thin filaments of actual precious metal, ceremonial, I would learn, though she wore it even here. She turned when she heard me, and I saw her eyes for the first time. They were gold, not amber gold, with a depth that suggested light was coming from inside rather than reflecting off the surface. Alien eyes, beautiful and unreadable. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then, you are smaller than I imagined. I get that a lot on this planet, Your Majesty. Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite a smile. I'd learned that the Keth didn't smile, not the way humans did. But there was a flicker of something in those gold eyes. Reassessment, maybe, or curiosity. "The Chamberlain has informed me," she said, "that 17 members of the High Guard requested formal transfers out of my personal detail upon hearing of your appointment." "Only 17. The flicker again, stronger. 23 requested. I denied the excess 6. "Generous of you." She tilted her head. "Do you always speak to sovereigns this way?" "I don't usually speak to sovereigns at all," I said. "This is new for both of us." She was quiet for a moment. The phosphorescent flowers pulsed behind her, slow and steady, like breathing. "You are not frightened," she said. It sounded less like a question and more like a finding, a data point she was cataloging. "I've been in firefights on 4 planets," I said. "Your garden is very peaceful by comparison." "My last personal bodyguard was afraid of me," she said. "He spent 3 years refusing to make eye contact." "Was he good at his job?" "Exceptional. He died stopping a blade meant for me during the conclave of 7 moons." There it was, under the wit and the gold eyes and the impossible composure. A weight, something she was still carrying. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked at me like the words had surprised her. Not the sympathy itself, she'd heard that before, probably in the formal language of court condolence, but the simplicity of it, the directness. "It was 2 years ago," she said. "The assassins were never identified." I held her gaze. "And you think they'll try again?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "That's why I'm here," I said. "Not because I'm a joke, that's the cover." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "You understood that immediately." "It took me about 40 minutes, actually. Sitting in my quarters last night working through it." I paused. "No disrespect." "None taken." She turned back to her flowers. "The logic is simple. Anyone sent to harm me will not consider a human bodyguard a genuine threat. They will focus their attention elsewhere. You become invisible." "And also actually do the job," I said. "Yes," she said, "that too." She reached out and touched one of the pulsing flowers, and the blue light intensified briefly under her fingertip, then settled. "I will be honest with you, Sergeant Reyes," she said. "I do not know whether you are capable of keeping me alive. I have read your service record. It is impressive by Terran standards. But you are here alone, in a palace full of people who either doubt you or resent you, and the forces that want me dead are patient, well-resourced, and familiar with this environment." "Honest assessment," I said. "I appreciate that." "You should also know," she said, "that I chose you partly because of that record and partly because you were the only consultant in the diplomatic quarter who had taken the time to learn functional Keth before arriving." I had spent 4 months learning it. My accent was still rough, my vocabulary full of gaps, but I could speak it, read it, and most importantly listen to it without needing a translation filter. "Information advantage," I said. "Yes." She looked at me again. "And partly," she said, and this time the shift in her voice was very small but very real, "because you looked at my portrait in the file, the formal portrait, which most diplomats find unsettling, and according to the behavior analysis algorithm, your reaction was not discomfort." "What was my reaction?" She held my gaze. "Wonder," she said. "I will not pretend the first month was smooth. The palace had a logic to it that took time to absorb. Not just the physical layout, though that was its own project. 17 wings across 3 connected towers with 48 different entry points, and a security rotation that shifted every 6 hours, but the social architecture underneath. The Keth court ran on precedents, on ritual, on a system of obligation and display that was thousands of years old and incredibly specific. And I spent the first 2 weeks making small errors that would have been career-ending for a Keth courtier, but which everyone was apparently too amused to bother punishing in me. I bowed when I should have stood. I stood when I should have knelt. I once addressed a high matriarch by the form reserved for her junior aides, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as someone encountering a particularly bold insect, then swept on without comment. But I was learning. Every morning before the Queen's schedule began, I spent an hour with the scribe who'd repeated her appointment words to me. His name was Peleth, and he was about 70 years old in human terms, deeply skeptical of me but fundamentally too curious to stay away, going through the day's protocols, the players I'd encounter, the context I needed. And every morning when the Queen emerged for her first official engagement, I was in position. Door left, 3 paces back, sight line clear to every entrance in the room. She never acknowledged me during official functions. That was correct protocol. The bodyguard is furniture. But sometimes on the edge of a room, after a particularly tedious ceremonial address or a court negotiation that had run 3 hours over time, she would glance in my direction. Not at me exactly, just in my direction. The way you check that something you need is still where you left it. I found I didn't mind being needed. On the 23rd day, she called me into her private study after the evening session. "The Veth delegation is arriving in 8 days, she said, without preamble, not looking up from the document she was reading. "They will bring 6 bodyguards of their own plus an honor escort. I need you to assess each one on arrival. Threat assessment, capability and loyalty assessment. I want to know who they're actually protecting and who might be watching me." I considered this. "You're expecting a move during the Veth visit." "The Veth Concordat has been lobbying for a renegotiation of the resource treaty for 14 months, she said. "They want 3 mining systems I have no intention of giving them. Someone in their delegation will be frustrated enough to look for alternate solutions." She set down the document and looked at me directly. "Or someone will simply use the chaos of a large diplomatic visit as cover. Same someone who hit the conclave of 7 moons." A pause almost imperceptible. "I believe so." "Do you know who hired them?" She was quiet for a moment. "I have a theory," she said. "I have had a theory for 2 years. I have not been able to prove it." "Tell me." She looked at me like she was weighing something. Then, Lord Councillor Vethorin, the Veth delegation's senior advisor, he was at the conclave. He left 20 minutes before the attack. "That's thin." "I know. But you trust your instincts." "My instincts have kept me alive for 38 years, she said quietly. "My bodyguard's instincts kept me alive for 3 more and then they ran out." She paused. "I would like more data before the next attempt." I sat down across from her without being invited to, which was, Peleth had told me, a significant breach of protocol, and she blinked but said nothing. "What do you know about Vethorin specifically?" I said. She watched me for a moment. Then she pushed the document she'd been reading across the desk. It was a dossier, detailed, carefully compiled over clearly a long period of time. The kind of intelligence file you put together when you're building a case quietly, without resources, without being able to trust anyone around you to help. She'd built this herself. "You've been investigating him for 2 years, I said, "alone." "I couldn't trust anyone inside the palace with this," she said. "If my theory is wrong, I have accused a Concordat official without cause. If my theory is right, he has allies here I haven't identified yet." I read through the dossier. It was thorough, patient. There were gaps, but the circumstantial pattern was real. Vethorin had been at or near 3 separate incidents involving threats to the Keth throne over the past 6 years, always departing slightly before the moment of violence, always with a perfectly reasonable alibi. "He's good," I said. "Yes. But he makes one consistent mistake." I tapped a page near the back. "He always uses Keth nationals as his instruments. Never Veth, never outside contractors. which means he's been building a network here for a long time, and those people still have to be here. She was watching me intently now. His network didn't die at the conclave, I said. He lost one agent, the rest are still in place, waiting. And the visit is his opportunity to activate them, she said. With the Veth delegation as cover and noise. Yes. I set the dossier down. I'm going to need access to the personnel rotation logs for the last 3 years, and the catering and supply contracts service staff are always the overlooked vector, and whatever security footage you have from the conclave if there's any. She stared at me. What? I said. My last bodyguard, she said slowly, never once asked for investigation access. He protected my body. He did not investigate threats to my reign. I was told, I said, that I was here to keep you alive. I'm choosing to interpret that broadly. Another long silence. In the phosphorescent light of the study, her markings pulsed very faintly. I had learned that in the Keth, involuntary bioluminescent response to strong emotion was considered quite private, something they suppressed carefully in public. She wasn't suppressing it now. You will have whatever you need, she said, all of it. The next 7 days were the most intensive investigation work I had done since my last intelligence rotation with the Coalition. And that was saying something, because that had involved tracking a black market weapons network across 3 systems while pretending to be a merchant. Peleth became an unlikely partner. Once he understood what I was doing, his skepticism transformed almost overnight into zealous assistance. He had served the Queen's court for 40 years. He knew every face, every name, every relationship. He couldn't fight, but he could tell me in 3 sentences the complete political and personal history of anyone who walked into a room, which turned out to be exactly as useful. The catering access records were the first break. There were 7 supply staff whose scheduling showed a pattern. They were consistently assigned to low-traffic areas near the Queen's personal corridor during high-attendance events, despite those positions normally going to senior staff. Someone had been quietly rerouting the assignments for the past 18 months. The rotation logs confirmed the same individual's authorization code on every adjustment. A mid-level logistics administrator named Sorn, who had been hired 3 years ago on the recommendation of a counselor who turned out to be a known social associate of Vethorin. Thread pulled. I spent a day on Sorn's background. I spent another day on the 7 supply staff. 3 of them were clean, wrong place by genuine administrative accident. 4 were not. I didn't arrest anyone. Not yet. I documented, I mapped. I traced the connections back as far as they went, and by day 6 I had enough to be fairly confident of the structure. A cell of 8, including Sorn, coordinated through encrypted personal communicators using a commercial platform with a privacy feature designed for trade negotiations. Vethorin had chosen it specifically because it would look like legitimate diplomatic traffic. On the evening of the 6th day, I laid it all out for the Queen. She sat very still while I walked her through it. Then she said, "You found in 6 days what I could not find in 2 years. You were working alone and maintaining a sovereign schedule at the same time," I said, "and you didn't have Peleth. Peleth helped you. Peleth is extraordinary. You should tell him that occasionally." She looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize, the one where she was recalibrating something, quietly, without announcing it. "What do you recommend?" "We let the Veth delegation arrive," I said. "We don't move against the cell yet. We don't want to alert Vethorin before he commits. We let him activate the network. And when he does, we already know where everyone is. You want to let them start the attack. I want to control the conditions so we're ready when they do. Yes." She was quiet for a moment. That is an enormous amount of trust to place in preparation and timing. "It is," I said, "and in me specifically." She looked at me directly. "Are you asking me to confirm that I trust you?" I'm checking, I said, because what I'm proposing requires me to be your last line of defense for a window of time, and if you have doubts about my capability now is the time to surface them. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window. The city beyond the palace spread out below in layers of light, bioluminescent structures, moving transit lines, the warm glow of a civilization in full, unhurried operation. When the Chamberlain first brought me your file, she said without turning, I read it 3 times. I have not told you this. Your record shows 17 combat engagements over 6 years. In every single one, the principal you were assigned to protect survived. Correct. In 4 of those engagements, you were injured. Also correct. She turned. And in 1, she said quietly, you stayed on post for 6 hours with a puncture wound to your side because evacuation would have required leaving your principal unsecured. I hadn't expected her to know that detail. It wasn't in the official record. It was in a supplemental medical report buried in a file that required 3 levels of clearance to access. You went further than the file, I said. Yes, she said. I wanted to know who I was trusting my life to. She held my gaze. The light from the city was behind her, and in this light her markings were subtle, a soft silver tracing on violet skin, like starlight on deep water. I trust you, she said. Sergeant Davin Rays, I trust you entirely. A pause. And I find that, unexpectedly, the most settled I have felt in 2 years. The Veth delegation arrived with ceremony. 47 members. 6 official bodyguards who I assessed in the receiving line, capable, professionally paranoid, genuinely loyal to their own principle. They were not the threat. The honor escort of 12 was window dressing. Lord Councillor Vethorin arrived 4th in the formal procession, unhurried, silver-robed, with the practiced benignity of someone who had been a political operator for decades. He looked at me once, briefly, in the way people look at furniture they find slightly out of place. I looked back. He moved on. The first day was ceremony. Formal addresses, gift presentation, the ritual meal that took 4 hours and required me to stand for all of it, which was fine. I'd stood longer. The second day was negotiations, which meant a closed session in the treaty chamber with a roster of officials and advisors on both sides, security posted outside. That was when Sorn moved. I knew he would because I'd put a passive monitor on his communicator the day before the delegation arrived, not recording, just alerting me when he opened a channel. When the alert triggered at the 40-minute mark of the treaty chamber session, I had exactly what I'd anticipated. The cell was being activated, the signal going to 6 of the 8 members. The other 2 were already in position. I had 43 seconds to get from the security post outside the treaty chamber to the Queen's side, before the 2 prepositioned members reached her through the secondary access corridor that the cell had apparently mapped months ago. I used 39 of them. I came through the side door of the treaty chamber just as the first operative, service staff, carrying what should have been a refreshment tray, cleared the staff entrance on the opposite wall. She saw me. I was already moving. What followed was not elegant. I want to be clear about that. It was fast, close, and ugly, the way real protective action almost always is, nothing like what people imagine from dramatized versions, which tend to feature clear sight lines and plenty of space and opponents who oblige you by coming one at a time. The first operative had a blade. I took the tray hit that was meant to create distance, used the momentum, controlled the blade hand, and put her down without the weapon reaching anyone. The second came from a different angle, which told me he was either better trained or they'd anticipated resistance. I took a cut on my forearm getting around the first strike, not deep, just enough to track blood, and then that one was down too. The room had erupted. Veth delegation officials were on their feet. Keth court members were scrambling. 3 high guard came through the main doors with weapons raised. The queen had not moved. She was standing at the head of the negotiating table, exactly where she'd been when I'd entered, and she was watching me with those gold eyes, calm, very calm, in a way that I would have called inhuman, except that I was starting to understand that for her, this was not the absence of feeling. It was the management of it. She had been afraid. She was choosing not to be. I crossed the room to her, put myself between her and the still unsecured staff entrance. "I need a secondary extraction route," I said quietly in Keth. "Now." "The East Gallery," she said, equally quiet. "Behind the tapestry there is a passage. It has not been used in 60 years. "Cobwebs," I said. "Most likely." "Acceptable." I glanced at the high guard now securing the room. "Tell them to hold the cell members for interrogation. Don't let Vethorin leave the building." She turned to the senior high guard and relayed exactly that, not my instructions, her orders, crisp and unambiguous. And then she looked back at me. "Your arm," she said. "It's minor, we move first." "Davin." It was the first time she had used my name. Just my name, not my rank, not my title, and the way she said it, with a kind of carefully controlled urgency that I understood immediately, was not protocol but something much more direct, made me look at her face instead of the room for exactly 1 second. "I'm fine," I said. "I promise, move." The East Gallery passage was exactly as described. It was also, as predicted, full of cobwebs, poorly lit, and smelled like a room that had been closed since before my grandfather was born. We moved through it in silence, her hand on my uninjured arm, not leaning on me, just maintaining contact in the dark, which was practical, and came out through a concealed panel into a storage area 2 wings away. The high guard had the building locked down within 9 minutes. Vethorin was detained in the negotiation chamber. He had tried to leave, citing diplomatic immunity, and the Queen had apparently transmitted authorization for his temporary detention that had reached the guard commander before he'd gotten to the door. She had composed that authorization on a personal device, while walking through a dark, cobwebbed passage with her hand on my arm. I found that out later. I found a lot of things out later, in the secure debrief that followed, with Peleth and 2 of the Queen's most senior intelligence advisors, where the full scope of what I'd mapped over the previous week was laid out and cross-referenced against what the detained cell members were, under significant but I was told entirely legal pressure, now telling investigators. Vethorin had been running the network for 5 years. The Conclave attack had been his first overt move after years of positioning. He had believed the new queen, she had taken the throne only 18 months before the Conclave, would be easier to manage than her predecessor, and when she had proved not to be, he had escalated. He had also, it emerged, dramatically underestimated how carefully she had been watching him. The case was solid before I'd arrived. My work had completed it. When the debrief ended, the intelligence advisors filed out. Peleth caught my eye on the way out and gave me a very small, very dignified nod, which from him I had come to understand was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. The Queen and I were alone in the room. My arm had been treated, the cut was shallow, 3 centimeters, already sealed with wound adhesive, and I was at the point of exhaustion that feels very calm, the way a storm feels calm at the absolute eye of it. She was looking at me. "You should rest," she said. "In a minute. Your face looks like a man who is deciding whether to say something." "I'm deciding whether it's appropriate." "You haven't let appropriateness stop you yet," she said. "Start now and I'll be suspicious." I looked at her. "You built that dossier for 2 years," I said, "alone because you couldn't trust anyone in your own court. That's a long time to carry something by yourself." Her expression shifted, very slightly, but she had stopped controlling it the way she controlled it in public. "It was," she said. "You don't have to do that anymore," I said. Whatever comes next, you don't have to do it alone. She was quiet for a long moment. The room was very still. Somewhere outside, far away, I could hear the sounds of the palace resuming its normal operations, the hum and footfall of a world returning to itself after crisis. "You are meant to be a joke," she said softly. "The human, the small strange creature from the new civilization that everyone was too amused to take seriously." She paused. "And instead you—" She stopped. "Instead I what?" I said. "You made me feel safe," she said. "For the first time in 2 years. That is—" She paused again. "That is a significant thing, Sergeant Reyes." "Davin," I said. She looked at me. "What?" "You called me that before." "In the treaty chamber." I held her gaze. I didn't mind. Something moved through her gold eyes. Something that wasn't policy or strategy or the careful performance of sovereignty. Just her. Just the person under all of it, exhausted and relieved and looking at me like I was something she hadn't expected to find. "Davin," she said, and this time it wasn't urgency. It was something else. Something quieter and more careful and much more real. "Your Majesty," I said. The faintest thing crossed her face. "Vaelithra," she said, "when we are alone." That was 8 months ago. A great deal has happened since then. Vethorin was tried under the joint jurisdiction of the Keth Matriarchy and the Concordat Assembly. The Concordat, once presented with the full evidence, was eager to distance themselves from him, which is how these things usually go. He is currently serving a sentence that will outlast his natural lifespan in a secure facility on a quiet moon. The network he built has been dismantled. The cell members who cooperated with the investigation received reduced sentences. Those who didn't are joining him. The Veth Treaty was renegotiated. Without Vethorin and his leverage, the Concordat's position was considerably less aggressive, and the Queen got a fair settlement that left the 3 mining systems intact. Peleth was formally recognized for his contributions to the investigation, with a distinction that made him cry, quietly, into a very small ceremonial kerchief, which he would deny if asked. I was offered a permanent position as head of palace security, which I accepted, with one modification to the standard contract. I remain the Queen's personal bodyguard. That position is not a stepping stone. It's the job. I have no interest in delegating it. The court no longer laughs. That happened gradually, then suddenly, the way most changes in perception do. There were skeptics who became grudging acceptors after the treaty chamber incident. There were a few, Peleth's category, who had recalibrated faster. There were the High Guard commanders, who had requested transfers, and who now conduct themselves toward me with a professional respect that I don't think any of us would have predicted in that corridor a year ago. The Grand Chamberlain, who read my name from the scroll while the room laughed, has said to me exactly once, in passing, and entirely without preamble, "The Queen made the correct selection," and then walked away before I could respond. I count that as a win. As for Vaelithra, she is extraordinary. I want to be precise about that, because I have worked alongside extraordinary people, and I know the category doesn't have a single shape. She is not extraordinary because she is a queen, or because her civilization is ancient, or because of the gold eyes, or the silver-traced markings, or the composure that looks like coolness, and is actually something much harder earned. She is extraordinary because she sat alone for 2 years in the middle of a court she couldn't trust and built, painstakingly, in stolen hours, a case that no one else could see yet, because she knew it was real, and she knew it mattered, and she kept going. She is extraordinary because she chose me, actually chose me, for real reasons behind the joke of it, before she had any evidence I could be trusted with the full weight of what she was carrying. She is extraordinary because when the room had erupted and everything was sharp edges and noise and the very real possibility of violence reaching her, she stood still and calm and waited for me, specifically, to get to her side. Not the High Guard, me. I think about that a lot. I think about a lot of things in the months since the treaty chamber. Moments. Her voice saying my name in the dark of that passage. The look on her face in the empty debrief room when she said I made her feel safe. The way she conducts herself in public, every inch the sovereign, measured and brilliant and intimidating. And the way that composure shifts very slightly when it's just us. When we're in the private study going over security assessments, or in the East Garden in the mornings, when she touches the phosphorescent flowers and they pulse brighter under her hand. She has, on 3 separate occasions now, asked me to stay after the formal business is concluded. On the 3rd occasion, she asked me what I found remarkable about humans, what we thought made us special. I told her I wasn't sure we had a consensus answer to that we'd been debating it since before we had the word human to put to ourselves. She said, I will tell you what I find remarkable. And I waited. You are new, she said. Your civilization is new, your space is new, your way of doing things is new. And instead of being afraid of that, instead of hiding behind youth or deference, you are curious. You walk into strange palaces and learn the language before you arrive and sit down without being invited and ask questions that no one else thinks to ask. She paused. You treat newness as an advantage. I was quiet for a moment. You watched all of that, I said. I watch everything, she said. It is my nature, a pause, but I watch you more carefully than most. Why? She held my gaze. Because you are worth watching, she said, simply like it was obvious, like it had been obvious for a long time. I thought about the garden, the flowers, the long evenings in the study after the formal day was done. I thought about what it meant that she had told me her name. Valithra, I said. She looked up. I think, I said carefully, that I should tell you something. You may tell me anything, she said. And she said it with a certainty that I understood had been built slowly, the way she built everything, carefully, with evidence over time. I came here as a joke, I said, and I think I'm going to end up staying. The gold eyes held mine. Yes, she said softly. I think you are. And in the private garden of the Queen of the Sovereign Keth, with phosphorescent flowers pulsing blue in the evening light, and a civilization of 6,000 years of history quiet around us, she reached out and touched the back of my hand. The small, deliberate touch of someone making a choice they've been thinking about for a long time. And I understood very clearly that neither of us was joking anymore. The court laughed the day she chose me. They stopped laughing the day I came through that door. They will not start again. And every morning when I take my position, door left, 3 paces back, sight line clear, and she looks in my direction in that way she has, the way that isn't quite looking at me but is absolutely about me, I think, She knew. She knew before I did. 38 years of trusting her instincts. Turns out she was right about this one too. End of story. #story parameters log. Dimension selection. Human narrator type, bodyguard. Alien female role, queen/empress. Setting, royal palace/throne room, right arrow under C. Obstacle, antagonist, assassination plot, plus internal court network. Mood plus stream, action-driven R, plus charged slow burn. Ending type, doubter's silence plus, she chooses him openly. Ban tropes, check, white heavy checkmark, no explicit content, white heavy checkmark, no non-consent, white heavy checkmark, adult stream only, white heavy checkmark, no stock phrases verbatim. Seed film, Intergalactic Swingers, 2013. Outsider Coalition, Infiltration, Political Alliance Stakes, Comedic Reversals. Unexpected Loyalty. Approx. Word count ~9 800 words, minutes at 160 WPM.